Before we went on a break, we asked Prof the last question, that is on the influence of the exile that many African writers had engaged themselves in. And Prof explained this in details, giving his own personal opinion. Now we are moving on to the next question. Ms. Nura?
Yeah. So, Prof, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, in your own belief, which African writers, maybe which African or global writers do you think influenced Ngugi's work profoundly?
Oh, good. This is an excellent question. From what I know, some of the earliest, Scottish English writer was Walter Scott, who wrote historical novels. Walter Scott was a huge influence on many early English-speaking African writers, like Achebe, Ngugi himself, and others. Even some of the, there are many other writers in the Lusophone countries that we don't talk about, but some of them, the New English. But so Walter Scott. Walter Scott. He wrote. Some people have argued that he literally invented what you call the historical novel. It's a novel that takes its theme from history, from actual happiness. I wasn't surprised when I read an interview with Ngugi in Abuja when he visited for a literary festival, that he was now paying attention to creative non-fiction. Creative non-fiction is just fiction with a dose of historical or factual or realistic facts and so on. So Walter Scott. Also Dickens. Clearly Dickens. Dickens literally invented what you call the sociological novel, if you look at Hard Times.
Yeah, Hard Times, of course.
And so on. And so on.
There's
Great novels.
Great expectation.
And so on. Great expectations about the industrial novel, about struggles of people in early industrial Britain, and which closely, that kind of novel closely mirrors the situation in Africa during and after colonialism, when factories began to arrive and people were sweating 18 hours a day, and so on. And then unmistakably, Conrad.
Correct.
But most of them were not happy with Conrad. Achebe wrote a riposte, very well known, on
the Fall Apart.
Yeah, things. On Heart of Darkness.
Heart of Darkness. Yes.
Which is well known. I even taught it in my class, in which he argues that Conrad was a racist, and that Conrad, the way he doesn't represent. Okay, since we're talking about the novelist, the present, he doesn't represent Africans as human. That his racism also shared by Marlowe, or that Marlowe racism is shared by Conrad himself. Also, others argued that because Conrad used he modulated the narrative point of view, so that's evidence that he has distanced himself from the novel. But this didn't convince Achebe, who wrote a famous essay that, in fact, he calls a bloody racist. Ngugi himself wrote in Writers in Politics, the first edition and the second edition. I have both, in which he talks about Conrad. That people like Conrad had no respect for Africans, and that they were victims of the reproduced prejudices against Africans. The suspicion by Hegel that Africans were subhuman, or just not incapable, they are not fully developed humans, or the arguments of when we read that Africans are children. That's why Africans were called boy, B-O-Y, or you child. Remember, we've no child.
You've no child, yeah.
And that we had no culture, we haven't built institutions. So I think that, and also another writer I suspect might be Mark Twain. Mark Twain, the American writer, who has a more liberal attitude. There's no evidence that Mark Twain held racist views towards blacks.
Yes.
So Mark Twain too.
So he was so selective in his choice.
Because you couldn't just like anyone. There are others they didn't like. Conrad is one that they wrote back to. But there are others that influenced them. But you see, the novel itself, all African writers, beginning from Achebe, 1958, and then subsequently the other writers that wrote the novel, all based on the realist novel. That's one proof that they're influenced by European novelists. But there are other French writers, like Madame de Staël, and also this guy who wrote this French guy, oh my God, sometimes as I grow older, the guy who wrote about the miners.
The miners.
Okay.
What's his name? Give me the name. As I grow older, I keep missing names. I keep forgetting names. Who wrote
the title?
Yeah, and also clearly, African writers were not impressed by or with Kafka.
Kafka, yes.
For example, most of them didn't like modernism, modernist writers, T.S. Eliot. But if you read Aikwe Amos novels, you can see that there must be some modernistic influence, even if he modified much of it. Just look at fragments. Just look at the video annotated about the grit, the dissatisfaction with the environment. The general, we call it, so you can call it a dystopian novel. Dystopian.
So what is dystopian novel?
Dystopian is the opposite of utopian.
Okay.
It's the opposite of utopian. Utopia. Utopian means fantastic, like paradise, all is well, there is harmony, and that there is a promise of development in the future.
Yes.
Dystopian novel is a novel of disillusionment and pessimism. That's right. So all these trends you can find in many African, but that generation is going out. Ngugi Achebe has died. Ngugi has died, and Shoenka will die because he's 90. He's not going to live. He may be live 100, but the last one is mostly 65, 75.
Yes.
And then Aikwe Ama himself is very old now. They are all born in the 30s. In the late 30s. So that generation, that generation is going to die out. There's a new generation of writers.
Okay.
That's one I don't like. Chidi
Chimamanda.
I don't like her.
Yes,
I have to say it on air.
Yes.
No, I think,
why?
I don't think it's a good writer. She writes on worked out themes about division. Look at what she writes about the Civil War. But he's just a hype. HYPE. Yeah, but this a Ghanaian Nigerian writer. Give me, I don't know, something about it. I keep, what's her name? Who wrote, a PhD student is working on her novels. Friday, what's her name? She's a Ghanaian but now lives in Norway.
Okay.
That's, and look at also Ben Okri.
Ben Okri,
yes. Who wrote the Famish Road. Whatever people say about it, he's the first to experiment with a new kind of modernism. Although he infuses it with some superstitious, if you like, phantasmagoric themes. Phantasmagoria is where is very close to magic realism, where stones talk, tables speak, and houses have ears, something like that.
Yeah.
Talking
about this magic
Amadako. I remember Amadako.
Yes, Amadako.
Viewers, please forgive me as I grow older. Names don't stay much in my brain. I don't know why. Maybe that side of aging.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Prof.
But I can't believe that I can't recall the author of from Akru Kerim. Something. There's another writer, but influenced in the Arabic tradition. Taib Sali. His season of migration to the north. Although, but he was a director in the BBC. He wrote that book and also wrote The Wedding of Zayn. He too was influenced by, although he has come from the Arabic. He died recently from the Arabic tradition, because he's Sudanese. He's, if you look at him, he's half. We call it Afro-Sudanese, Afro-Arab. He looks really a mixture of Arabs but I don't think he. Or look at Fate of a Cockroach, Tawfiq Al-Hakim. And so some of them were influenced by some themes in the English tradition, but also with the rise and need for writers to reflect on the impact of colonialism in their society, which are also Muslim countries. Muslim Islam can rival colonialism in terms of it has a vision of life. It has an ideology, a way of life, which Christianity too does have that, but not as encompassing as some of the writers that they found in Arab writers like Al-Hakim and Mahfouz. But that's a different story anyway.
Before then, I would like to ask this. How do you see Ngugi Wa Thiang'o? Do you see him as a modernist or postmodernist?
No, he's not a modernist. Let me qualify what I'm saying.
Okay.
See, modernism has many strands.
Okay.
There is a modernism that glorified artistic innovation.
Okay.
Like if you look at the work of T.S. Eliot, we call it, and some of them call it hyper-modernists. They experimented with new forms of writing fiction. To that extent, actually, Ngugi was not a modernist. In fact, probably he must have some arguments against it. But the old realist novel was no longer possible. If you look at his later works, he found that you can't go on with the realism because Marxism must have thrown doubt into that idea, because realism is a conservative literary mode in which you describe things authentically and clearly, so that as a camera would. But Marxist reflection theory, popularized by Lenin, would clash with that. Reflection theory, so that things are refracted. You can never get a direct, authentic representation in any art, but rather it's refracted, slanted towards the authors or the expectation of the audience. So I think that may have thrown the dust his own admiration for realism. So, but he was also gravitating clearly, one of his interviews, towards magic realism or magical realism, pioneered by Marquez, Garcia Marquez from, he was
Colombia.
Chilean, but initially he moved to Colombia.
Okay.
So Marquez excel in that and is now popular. Even Rushdie is now model his writing on magic realism. Yeah, look at so in which people fall from the sky but they don't die, as you see in Tom and Jerry. No death, no wounding. They can fall from the sky and land normally. So I think that he was moving towards that in the last 5 or 6 years or 8 years of his life, moving towards magic realism, which will suit his temper as a Marxist, Pan-Africanist, Africanist, nativist, critical individual. He also wrote pieces of Marxist criticism.
Yes.
He wrote pieces of literary criticism. He had 3 legs: an academic, a fictional writer, and a creative writer, and an oppositional guy, an advocate of better life in African countries.
Only one.
Opposition. So he maybe has 4 legs.
Yeah.
But he never stopped teaching. He was teaching in the US.
So, Prof, Ngugi is now no longer with us.
Yeah.
And what is his enduring legacy in the global literary space?
I think his legacy is will be enduring, will endure through the ages, because he's one of the most gifted African writers. He has probably the largest corpus.
Wow.
When I say corpus, you know what I mean? It's a Latin word, Latin word for body of works. He is the most prolific African writer, no question about this. Prolific. And then he had a clear vision. He knew his politics. He was committed to an ideal, and he was willing to enact critical reflections on many things. He was an oppositionist guy. He was a critical theorist. He was highly impressed by the works of postcolonial writers such as critics such as Edward Said, and many people who, in fact, Foucault, Derrida, who have weakened the arrogance of Western culture. So he was a very complex guy. He is unique. Even, Aikwe Ama would follow, but he's no longer writing, but he's highly, highly gifted.
So, who do you think among the African writers may fill the vacuum left by Ngugi Wa Thiang'o?
There's this guy, I'm trying to remember his name. This is, I can't believe this. You can Google it, the guy who wrote From a Crooked Dream. What's his name? But there are new writers now in the Arabic tradition. For example, writers in North Africa, like Al-Nawawi, though she died.
Yes.
But that one is a fantastic writer as well. Although her preoccupation is with her own women issues in the context of Islamic tradition.
Yes.
In clashing with modernity. Or Mahfouz, who also died, who received a Nobel. But if you come to West Africa, I think that they are, these are the greats. had this guy not been active, had he been active, but so I think the guy is, I will put my finger or I'll put my money on Major Mwangi.
Yeah, okay.
He wrote Going Down River.
It's like a, yes.
Carcass for Hounds, Kill Me Quick. These are fantastic novels. Interesting. I ask the reader or the listener to go and find. I have copies of them.
All right, Prof, let's talk about the issue of the politics of Nobel Prize.
Okay.
I heard in one of the programs with you that you said that it was the taste, not just the qualification. Do you believe that Ngugi Wa Thiang'o was supposed to win the Nobel Prize, although he was once mentioned?
Yeah, he was nominated several times by people like this guy in America. What's his name? I've forgotten his name. He's one of the foremost writers in the African tradition. And many people. Achebe too was nominated. Even Aikwe Ama. All the great African writers were nominated, except Shoenka got it. But let me be as honest as possible here.
Yeah.
There's literary taste. For those who are not in literary studies, there's taste with the A, not with E. T-A-S-T-E, taste. Yeah, that is the... What is a compelling tradition? What would impress an audience? When you write, already the audience has been schooled into a certain way of view literature. Poetry writing, is it modernist? Is it T.S. Eliot? Or Shakespeare? Or neoclassical poet? Or a postmodern, or even a hyperreal poet? So there is what you call literary taste. I think it goes a long way in determining what you value. For example, in the Nobel Prize thing, it's in Sweden, is dominated by the Western tradition.
Yes.
One, I suspect that I've said it before, elsewhere. One of the reasons why Shoenka got it was that he modeled his dramas on Greek, look at it, on Greek mythology, on the Greek literature, which Western people argue that Greece was the foundation of their culture. Look at the buildings in America; they're all modeled on Greek-Roman buildings. So they were fascinated by an African using local idiom, using the well-known normativities around him, yet based the key theme on the Greek-Roman tradition. I think that's what got him the prize. But if you are talking about the mastery of form, capacity for a compelling story, now you will have to choose Ngugi or Aikwe Ama or Achebe. That's right. Because Things Fall Apart is a fantastic novel. It flows beautifully. It's held by this irony of contrasts. Okonko Unoka. Tradition, Christianity. Woe and this guy, what's his name, who said, what's his name? I can't remember his name now. Who tells Woe, the son of that Okonko is not your father. Jesus art your father in heaven. So these writers, Ngugi, Aikwe Ama, Achebe, these three, in my opinion, most of them wrote critical pieces against the West. Ngugi
So is it
has books and books and books on attacking colonial culture. Aikwe Ama also
yeah.
and Achebe's essays. There I have a publisher in a Western journal. I study his look at his something on Queen Victoria, citizen of Queen Victoria. He wrote many critical. In fact, some people argue that Achebe may have pioneered what is called postcolonial theory in fiction. But Edward Said, Foucault, and others, Derrida completed it. So Kwame Baba and Spivak. So I think that I'm not surprised when they didn't receive the prize, because it was clear that they were not writing for Western audiences. They were writing to vindicate an African normativity.
And Prof, are you impressed by that, by their writing?
Those writers?
As somebody who has been trained in English and European languages, for example, are you impressed by their actions toward the West?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. They are oppositionists. They are critical, not only fictional, but also critical theories in their own right. And I think that in the era of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, many, even here today, and a modern, this year, many American congressmen made disparaging comments about black people. Or someone even said, well, Africans, Saul Bellow, who died, who was a prominent American writer, said when it was said that African fiction, African writing should be placed in American university. You know what he said?
Yeah.
He said, "No, we are nothing. They are nothing. Show me a black or an African or Zulu or a Nigerian Beethoven or Mozart." Very dismissive. But he himself was a Jew. Whose people were killed or smothered or gassed by Hitler in the Western tradition. So you find this, there are many people who hate Africans, and many people who will think that. I remember there was a conference by AHP at the University of Nairobi, in which I had some white Americans saying that, well, this is just propaganda. They are protest writers, just propaganda, that they lacked artistic capacity, which is false. But they couldn't say it in public. It's very difficult now. If you do now, you lose your job. No intellectual or scholar will come out and say these things now, because it's not true. I can tell you, you can quote me. Ngugi is much more gifted, in my opinion, than Conrad.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Then Dickens.
So Prof,
Then the guy who wrote Jude Obscure. What's the name of that guy?
Jude Obscure. This.
Give me the name.
Hardy.
Thomas Hardy.
Thomas Hardy.
Ngugi is far more gifted. Ngugi is a much more sophisticated writer than Thomas Hardy.
wow, the writer of
The
Test
only
of the
guy,
Ice.
the only guy that I can accept is Walter Scott and Shakespeare himself.
Shakespeare.
All others, no.
Oh my God.
This is my view.
All right, dear viewers and dear listeners, that has been Professor Ibrahim Bello-Kano from the Department of English and Literary Studies, Bayero University, Kano, discussing the life and works of Ngugi Wa Thiang'o. We are going on a short break, and when we come back, the program continues.
UK TV, broadcasting for knowledge and innovation.